Welcome, party goers. We know why we're here. In addition to being enlightened, we're getting ready to walk across campus for the holiday party at 3:30. And we're encouraging the consumption of caffeine so that you'll be up for that. Paul Courant requires no caffeine to make you awake and interested, as you'll see in a minute. The title sort of says it all. He was indeed the Provost and Executive Vice Chancellor at the University of Michigan, moving then into the rarefied air also of being University Librarian. And I think I mentioned to folks that he has a blog, and it's marvelously complete, telling you about his academic career, especially in economics, telling you about the years of serving as Michigan's chief financial and academic official, and also telling you the model of the BMW motorcycle he rides. So I commend his blog. Paul has a son living in El Cerrito. He has good friends on the Berkeley faculty. He gets out here frequently, I think. We'd like to see that even more frequently now that he's the university librarian. I give you Paul Courant, who has earned great respect among librarians, and also, and I say this as a great compliment, has been a disruptive influence in getting people to think in different ways and outside the normal confines of our profession. Paul, welcome to Berkeley.
Thank you all. Thanks, Tom. My technical competence has always been suspect and will continue to be so. And I wish I had a good punchline to what is obviously a setup for a joke, right? A former provost walks into a library and the first thing he notices, something what to his surprise, is that there are a lot of people there. And actually, of course, that is a surprise to the provost, because the provost has been told for years that nobody goes to the library, and sadly the provost himself or herself hasn't been to the library much since 1977 or so. And so what are all those people doing there is a pretty interesting question. And I'm going to reverse these two computers. Will the world come to an end if I try to move this one over to there, to the table? And this one up here? Yes, the world will come to an end. So I won't do that. Okay, excellent. I always like it when the world comes to an end. So let me just pull this down. So there's all these people in the library, and most of them aren't librarians. And what are they doing? Who are they? The electronic revolution was supposed to make the library become a quiet space. I noticed, by the way, in passing, that the library is much noisier than it used to be, and librarians are noisier than they used to be. So I was shocked to discover, as I got some training so I could work the reference desk. It occurred to me that since I'd never been a librarian, that being director of the library made me, it was a strange gig, right? All the other jobs I've had in the university, I used to report to. So I was a department chair, but I'd been a member of the department, and I was a dean, but I'd been a member of the school, and I was the provost, and I'd been a member of the faculty, and now I'm librarian, and I'd been what? So I figured I better learn how to do something that happens in the library, and reference was the closest to the thing that I sort of know how to do, or once knew how to do, which is research. And so I got myself trained to work the reference desk, and I'm now allowed to work, but only with a net. But what I discovered when I was doing this was that the wonderful, fairly young librarian who was training me was shocking to me, talked in an ordinary speaking voice while at the reference desk. Now, in my day, right, only talk about this loud because it might be that some. And so libraries really are much noisier than they used to be, and librarians are making a fair amount of the noise, and that is actually, I think, instructive for what's going on. The librarian walked into the library, and also the provost walked into the library and noticed that a lot of the people were undergrads, even though almost all of the noise that gets made in the provost office about what's wrong with the library and what the library should do is from faculty. In fact, often faculty of a particularly curmudgeonly ilk. So there is sort of a disjuncture that faculty are the ones who have something to say about the library, but undergraduates have a lot to say about what's in it and are the ones who are in it. And the third thing that the provost noticed actually long before walking into the library is that the place is really expensive, right? The operating budget of the library at Michigan is around 4% of the general fund. These numbers are so way not comparable across institutions, don't write them down. If we added the true cost of running the space, which we don't budget for in any rational way, the number would be much bigger than that. And so the provost, before walking into the library, had been scratching his beard and saying, gee, is there some way we could do this better, faster, cheaper? In order to get to answering that question, one actually has to talk a little bit about what this is. And here I put on my other major non-librarian hat. I'm not only not a librarian, but I'm also not a librarian. And the second way in which I'm not a librarian is that I'm an economist by training. I have been, in most of my career, an economist studying public economics, which is basically what governments do. And has a lot to do with the production of public goods, which I'll talk about in just a moment. And that history, that career as an applied public economist, turns out, in my view, to have a great deal to say about figuring out what we should be doing in the library, because the library is very much the kind of institution that public economics contemplates. But the short answer to the question, what should the library do? Or what is it that the library is doing, is advancing the interests of the university as a whole, which is very much the provost's job to calibrate. The provost as enacting that wonderful relationship between the central administration and the faculty, which is such a fun place to live. And I want to note that there is a good deal of talk in the library. The library gets very insulated. Sometimes think of itself as a sort of, a besieged institution that nobody understands. Only we understand ourselves. And I've certainly heard library directors talk about their job as if their job is to preserve the strength of the library as an institution. And that actually, I'm going to argue today, can't be right. That can't be the right job. Any more than it's the right job of the university press director to preserve the institution of the university press, just to pick an example that might resonate with librarians as not really being the right job. The job is to serve the functions of the institutions of scholarship. And we have to believe, and we've got very good reason for believing in the library world, that a robust library is utterly essential to doing that. But the robust library's purpose in life can't merely be a robust library. And I'll tell you, provosts find those kinds of arguments. The reason you have to continue to support the collection budget is that we're number 7 on the ARL list and we have a chance of falling to number 8. That is the most deeply unpersuasive kind of argument that can be made. Okay. So, I'm going to talk a lot today. Oh no, that did that, but this does this. There we go. There's the old joke about the two-handed economist. So anyhow, I won't tell the joke. So public goods, I think, are the frame that we should use to think about what it is that we produce. And Samuelson, Paul, not Linda, has this wonderful this definition of a public good. Each individual's consumption leads to no subtraction from any other individual's consumption of the good. All right? So the consumption is non-rival, is the technical term. And in fact one about these goods, markets aren't very good at producing them. So there's an excuse for the kind of production we do. And fact 2 about these goods is that libraries are an example of them. The library itself has this characteristic, And much of what the library does also has this characteristic. Now, it's not quite true, not exactly true. It is, in fact, a problem for us from time to time that two people can't read the same book at the same time. But two people can search the collection at the same time and can derive benefit from the totality of the collection, and they rarely get in each other's way. Sometimes they do. And indeed, where we have lots of people who all want to read the same book at the same time, it turns out that that book was assigned for Chemistry 117, and we better buy a lot of copies of it, and we do. But most of the collection, and certainly most of both the scholarly collection and the journal collection, you don't need to have it's that there is one copy is enough to meet this public goods criterion almost all of the time. So I said that markets produce these books, these kinds of goods imperfectly. Thomas Jefferson, this is a very familiar quote, talks about these things in a nice and compelling way. I think most librarians have seen and used this quote. If you haven't, you should, because it very much makes the point about why intellectual property is a basically, how do I put this, bad idea. The great thing about ideas, the great thing about inventions is that they can be easily transmitted in this non-rival way from one entity to another. And so given that they can be, my research assistant on this project put it very well. He said, it's sort of mean-spirited not to do it, right? And it's also inimical to the purposes of education and scholarship not to share our ideas. And we'll talk about copyright a little bit later. And I don't want to pretend that people who produce good ideas shouldn't get paid something for it. That's actually not the point of view that I'm going to take. I'm just only going to sort of take that point of view. So what does the library do? Oops, I'm still having this problem. So we provide access that's very much in this public goods notion. We have this great, wonderful thing, and we let people come look at it and use it. We provide, and this is utterly crucial, and it doesn't get talked about enough, it seems to me. We provide reliability, and not particular reliability of sources. So if you go to the library and you look at a journal article, or you look at a book, or you look at a manuscript, and it's been cataloged well, and you use it, and you refer to it reasonably accurately, and somebody else comes back a month, or a year, or 100 years later, and wants to check to make sense of the argument that you made using that material, you know what the library does? Is it delivers the same thing to that user in a different time, and also, if the reference is done well, in a different place. And that permits the sort of functioning of scholarship as we know it. Without that, right, without that function, without reliability, we don't know what we have. And the library delivers this, has been delivering it for a long time, delivers it very well. And I know all of you in tech services are now going to say, oh, the cataloging really isn't that good and you don't really know. Look, trust me, it's really pretty good compared to what the rest of the world can do. We deliver a version that's related to reliability, which is provenance. We say actually where the thing came from. And if you know, one of the things that is a curmudgeonly hobby horse of mine is that an enormous amount of what you read in the papers nowadays doesn't say where it came from. An enormous amount of literature that sort of purports to be technical and serious literature does not do a very good job saying where the sources, where the ideas came from, and that's extremely destructive, I think, of our understanding of the world. The library delivers this, and again, delivers it reliably. And we also deliver a version of authority. The version of authority that we actually deliver, I think, is a combination of reliability and provenance. We sometimes assert, and I think it's a mistake when we do, that the stuff that's in the library, that's the good stuff. And the stuff that is in other places, bookstores, the internet, comic book stores, the public library, heaven forfend, that stuff is, that's just for the people. There's really nothing in there that's all that good. If it's in the university library, we know it's good, and we know that in part because nobody's ever read it. And I think that our claim that we're such good selectors that the stuff that we select has authority that stuff other folks select doesn't is probably wrong empirically. It's undemocratic as hell. And I think it's also somewhat anti-intellectual, right? We should be more interested in a broader diversity of stuff. A friend of mine in art history summarized this as, you never know what's going to become an artifact. And if you're doing cultural studies, you really never know what's going to have become an artifact. So the authority business, I really think, is just reliability and provenance, but you could push it further. And you just can't do scholarship without this collection of stuff. And do I have a note there? I don't. That's good. Okay. Left-handed, no mouse. I mean, this is tough stuff I'm doing here. And I'm not doing it very well. That's not me, it's somebody else, good. So the business we're really in the university is the scholarship business, where we are learning and teaching. Learning being another word for research, teaching in part being the conveying of research even amongst other academics, not just the formal classroom teaching. I have argued elsewhere, and will argue vigorously when we talk amongst each other later, that in order to qualify as at least useful ideas, in order to qualify as scholarship, in order to qualify as research, ideas have to be conveyed. They have to be published, not in the sense that they have to be published in an authoritative university press. They have to be published in the sense that they have to be made public, and made public in at least a clean enough way so that you can put what you learned in the library and somebody else can get it back out again and know it was the thing that you said that you learned. And that is the foundation, I think, of the business that we are supporting in libraries. And I think that that's our role in doing that well is the thing that we have to sell to our various constituencies. So I have a line here someplace that publish or perish should be thought of as a moral imperative rather than as simply the sadism of department chairs towards assistant professors. And it's very comforting to me as a former department chair that I can re-encode what felt like sadism at the time as a moral imperative. Okay, so the fact that we're a public good doesn't repeal some very interesting economic questions about what we do. It is often argued, by the way, in a sort of garbling of the public goods notion, because something is a public good and because markets don't produce it well, cost should be irrelevant to thinking about its production. That's actually deeply wrong. Because it's a public good, because it's valuable, because markets aren't very good at producing it, we actually ought to be thinking about cost all the time. We don't have the market discipline to assure that we're efficient with respect to cost. But by being efficient with respect to cost, we can do more of the things that we really care about. And it's very much incumbent upon us to pay attention to that. So if you can do what you do just as well for 10% less, that means you can do 10% more of what you do, and that would be a good thing. So we ask the standard economic questions: what are we going to produce? Who are we going to do it for? How are we going to do it? And the technology changes a lot. And at what cost? We don't always have choices, of course, about cost, but we sometimes do, and we should take them very seriously. I also note that these questions apply to higher education in general, not just to the library. So all of these questions: what do we want to do? What are we trying to do? Who are we doing it for? We're doing it for undergraduates. We're doing it for economic development in the state. We're doing it for our own constituencies of scholars. We're doing it for the regents. et cetera. And we're doing it for the alumni, and actually each of those entities that cares about what we do cares about it in a somewhat different way, and if we're going to be successful, we have to take that seriously. The how and what cost also show up in higher education in general. So one important comment I want to make here, and I'll get back to it, is that the research library is also more broadly an academic library. So the research library supports the behavior of scholars who are inventing, creating new knowledge and doing the things that scholars do. It also supports teaching, undergraduate teaching in particular. And it is often the case, although I know it would never happen at an institution such as Berkeley, it is often the case that the library sort of forgets that. It is often the case, and again, I know it couldn't possibly happen at Berkeley, that the faculty sort of forgets that. And there are really good reasons for caring about undergraduate education. One of them is if we don't, produce a generation of people who appreciate how education, how learning really works, they aren't going to continue to pay taxes to keep us in business in future generations. They're also going to get a lot of things wrong. They're also by far the largest real constituency, right? The regents and the Secretary of Education, when they talk about what the university does, it's almost all undergraduate education with a little bit of tech transfer on the side. And so we have to take the undergraduate part very seriously. And I think that research libraries that also think of themselves as academic libraries, that look at what liberal arts colleges do in the library, will be well served by that, although of course we do things at very, very different scale. The other point I want to make about costs is the technical change that we're undergoing, the digital revolution, whatever version of it we want to use as characterization, the wonderful thing that enables me to try to figure out how to present this talk with two different computers at once, is plausibly a big cost reducer for both higher education and for libraries, and totally hasn't been yet. And one of the criticisms that we get from the broader public that wants to know why we're so expensive is, how come the digital revolution hasn't saved you guys any money? Fair question. And of course, then there's the simple-minded version of it. Why do you still have the books? Haven't you digitized them all and they're all on files? And I don't even use the library, says the chemistry professor. I get everything online. There's that version of it, which is not especially helpful. But it is helpful, I think useful to ask ourselves the question, can information technologies make some of what we're doing a good deal less expensive so that we can do more things with it? And I think the answer to that has to be yes, and it's another reason why provosts are interested in libraries and technology. What I've just said also applies to publishing itself, and here I have to say academic libraries are spectacularly innovative, radical institutions that rethink their business every day compared to, say, academic publishers. And so the sort of vigorous unwillingness of the publishing industry to take any material advantage of new technology, but rather to defend old business models, is an issue that we'll get to a little bit more shortly. So libraries and scholarship, this slide doesn't do much for me. Basically, scholarship goes in, scholarship goes out. I already said that. More important is this change in the geographic configuration of libraries and scholarship as we imagine being able to really share digitized collections. So the current world, I forget which libraries these are, except the one in the upper right-hand corner is mine. The current world, we live next to the library, we're near and we're close to it and far away from the others, and we have interlibrary loan. We're doing better than that now to some extent, but basically the model under which these great libraries were built was one in which it mattered a great deal which library you were nearest. The world we're going to move to, and in that world, in that current world, basically, the library served the university and served its home university in a special and important way. I wonder what happens if I press this button. No, that doesn't help. So, forgive me. And I had this public good notion earlier, right, that's non-rival. The public goods nature of the individual university library really applied only to the neighborhood, only to the particular university, and not very much to the rest of the world. This is extremely important because it means that universities could compete with each other, could spend a lot of money on their libraries, and do it in the interests of enhancing the reputation and productivity of the university itself. So you could produce these local public goods in what is also a competitive marketplace. And a provost would say, well, yeah, to the board, we spend, at Michigan, $44 million a year on the library. And the reason we do that is that the faculty wouldn't be here without it. It's a bargain, right? We also spend, we just, replace the network for however many tens of millions of dollars. Why? Because without that, we couldn't do the kind of communications that a good university has to do, and the board is completely persuaded by that. That changes if the scale at which information can be easily shared changes. And so it continues to be the case that if you're going to have a university, you're going to have a library. That's true, but it's much less obvious with new technology that the individual university library is the right format. So in this old model, users saved a lot of money and effort in terms of their time and research and travel by having a library nearby. Libraries were expensive, and it made sense for universities to build and maintain those libraries. In a world that we don't yet live in, but we can imagine, and these are the 5 original Google partners, anybody, right, and this "you are here" thing also applies to here, anybody can plausibly get at certainly all of the public domain material, and if we can make some minor arrangements in copyright law and our dealings with publishers and authors, all of the material, almost all of the material, we'll be able to get at it from almost anywhere. It's already the case, you've all played with Google Book Search, you can all go to the University of Michigan Libraries and Books, that there are now hundreds of thousands of public domain works, this is also the Open Content Alliance works, that you can get from anywhere. This is extraordinary. And the technology is going to allow us pretty soon now to have that kind of access to almost everything. In that setting, what is the role of the individual great university library, where great modifies both the university and the library? What is the role for the great libraries that have been the linchpins of the great universities? It'd be nice if I could answer that question entirely persuasively. Okay. So here's the real conundrum, I think. Once upon a time, printing was expensive. And publishers, librarians, and tenure review committees were happy. And it was good. Now, printing is essentially costless, or at least distributing is, and everyone is miserable. Making and distributing copies, yes, was once expensive and is now cheap. And we just could not be more depressed about this. What's wrong? And what's wrong, of course, is that the business model no longer fits the business. I've sketched out a piece of that, which is the relationship between the library and its own distinctive access, local access to collections, being so much more privileged than somewhat distant access. The other pieces of that are obviously going to have to do with publishers and such. So it ought to be the case that cheap copying is good for scholarship. right? Publication makes it easier to collaborate. Making things public and easy to find makes it easier to collaborate. Scholarship has often been described as standing on the shoulders of giants. My own experience of it is mostly standing on the shoulders of pygmies. People make tiny little contributions, but actually add them all up and you get somewhere. And that really is our fundamental method. And cheap copying and distribution ought to make it easier to do what it is that we're supposed to do. Information technology ought to be a helper, right, in doing our core business. And yet, I think it's fair to say that, if not a majority, a very large number of people in libraries, in scholarly societies, in journals, certainly among publishers, just think the worst thing that ever happened was the invention of the electron. I know that's a slight mischaracterization, but basically the invention of digital information technology. So that sort of concludes parts 1 and 2. I'm going to switch topics, but I'll get back and come to a remarkably unified conclusion shortly. And I actually am looking forward to some talking time, some back and forth. So we all know this, right? And it's totally true of our undergraduates, and actually it's pretty much totally true of our faculty too. What's really remarkable, I find, is that many of us on the faculty find it an enormous burden if they realize, oh my God, I'm going to have to go to the library and look at the actual book. Right? Isn't there some good alternative for that? And of course, the good alternative for that, which we totally know how to produce and are producing, is a digital copy of the actual book that you can search and at least look at online, if not be able to read the whole book of. So we are at risk because of this, I think, of driving people to the stuff that's easy to find rather than to the stuff that's any good. And I must say, rather exquisitely, our federated search tools, if anybody needed sort of reinforcing of the notion that the stuff that's in libraries isn't very easy to find, those tools would be a big helper. Right? Google is much, much, much easier to use, not just because the stuff that it's accessing is sort of randomly pulled from the web, but also because the way in which it's accessed is much, much easier to use. So we need to figure out how to put the good stuff in front of people, especially undergraduates, more easily. And publishers don't get this. And copyright law is not written with this goal, this fact in mind. The key social rights holder, it seems to me, is the kid who does a Google search and finds a pretty good website and doesn't find the chapter in a monograph published by a university press in 1973, or for that matter, 2007. And the publishers and academic societies, in many cases, are so terrified that some eyeball may get happy without them being paid, that they don't seem to get this most basic point, right? And universities and scholars are producing to get their stuff looked at, right? Not so much to get their stuff sold. And yet the copyright setup is very much one of making sure that if somebody looks at it, somebody gets paid. And here's what we don't know, but I think it's important. It might well be that you would sell more if it was impossible to find things electronically where people could look for things for free. My guess is it's much more likely you just get fewer looks. And a big disjuncture in business models between the model of scholarship, which is basically one of open sharing, as long as I get paid something. I think most scholars certainly, if they're in it for the money, they're too dumb to have gotten tenure. So there's a sort of nice theorem you can prove about that. So most scholars mostly want to get read. The difference between that model and the model in which what's really important is to get paid for every look is a big difference. What happens when those two things become in opposition with each other? Well, you get fewer looks, or fewer looks than you could, and that's actually a really very bad thing for our business. I'm going to skip past this. I'm going to skip past that. I'm going to talk a little bit about this. So the library, if you think about the information that's embedded in the library materials. There's a range of things that are sort of just information, right? Just the data, the simplest kinds of facts, technical monographs about this or that that are done as photo offset off TypeScript. There's some artifact interest in that because it's just amazing that publication was ever that cruddy. But other than that, you only need one or two of them to prove that point. It's basically all information, codified laws, congressional hearings, et cetera, et cetera. And then there's stuff where the artifact is really important. So on the left, I've got a page from LexisNexis, which I'm showing you only under fair use criteria. I guess you're probably licensed to see it, it's okay. And on the right, I have a piece of papyrus from the University of Michigan's collections. Well, when you actually see the papyri, you go, right? When you look at some of the early Bibles, when you look at a manuscript of Galileo's or original Audubon prints, there are works out there that having the object, having the artifact, knowing how the book was made, knowing how the print was made, are terrifically important. And those things we should definitely digitize and make as available as we can publicly, but they have content that cannot be summarized as zeros and ones, or at least not yet. But a lot of the stuff that's in our libraries is almost all information and almost not artifact. And in a world where you can re-encode the information and keep it and deliver it very compactly, we ought to treat these kinds of objects at opposite ends of this continuum quite differently. And I think that leads to quite a good deal of change in our practices. So that's a useful distinction. And the next couple of slides pretty much aren't. A lot of what we do depends on us. I'll just run through those slides. Libraries allow us to learn stuff. They allow us to discover stuff. And they allow us to become deeper, more understanding, complete human beings. So what? Now that's actually all very important, and you can't do it without libraries. And you also can't do it if you can't access the materials. And so this gets to the next part, which is copyright in the commercial and quasi-commercial publishing industry. I would call the university press industry quasi-commercial because it almost always loses money, but it tries not to. So let's go back to the fundamentals, which are really wonderful, right? You all know this because you're librarians. Nobody else in the academy knows it. So if there are two people here who are faculty members who aren't librarians, this might be news. Congress shall have the power to promote the progress of science and the useful arts. What better goal can there be than that? By securing for limited times to authors and inventors the exclusive right to their respective writings and discoveries. Securing for limited time. So the framers understood, right, that's from the Constitution, the framers understood that you actually couldn't get this problem perfectly right. This knowledge, these useful arts that we want to have progress, the useful arts require the standing on the shoulders of giants and pygmies. And so you want to make the ideas and their instantiations available broadly. But if you don't give a monopoly right for a while to the producer, then some really good stuff won't get produced. So there's a trade-off there. There's no perfect way to do it. And so they picked a number, 14, which is the biblical 7 times 2. And I don't know where else the number came from, or maybe it had something to do, I've heard some other apocrypha about where that number might come from. Anyhow, it was a fine number. And then it got doubled to 28, then it got doubled again to 56. Doubling is a very natural thing, and now it's life plus 70 years, which is a lot like forever. And so this goal of copyright, the promotion of the progress of science and the useful arts, has become almost exclusively the goal of assuring the incomes of copyright holders. That goal isn't complete. There's still some fair use, although the House tried to take a chunk of it away just yesterday, which we will get to. This goal of copyright, interestingly, is exactly the way the interests of scholarship would have defined it. Scholars don't always like to talk about progress of science and the useful arts. That's a little too materialist for many of us. But the notion that the goal of scholarship is to share and learn from each other across time and space, that's exactly what we do. And this is the notion that underlies the original copyright law, and you'd think we could stick with it. Whoops. My computer here just got very annoyed with me. Why did it do that? Okay, that's better. Here's something else. This is one of those lovely charts. Here's something else that I think we all know. We have about 7.3 million volumes in the library, which somehow rounds up to 8. I've never quite figured out why. About 28% of them seem to be in the public domain. About 2/3 of them probably aren't, or presumed to be in copyright. And as we know, 95% of the stuff that's presumed to be in copyright is out of print, which means actually nobody thinks they're actually ever going to make any money off of that in the future. And therefore, spending a lot of resources trying to figure out how to squeeze a little bit of money out of it is probably not the best thing that can be done for the social good. The challenge we face institutionally, big challenge, is to persuade Congress that there should be some reasonable way of giving us access to that 95%. Not for free. So I'm quite willing to make a deal with the publishers that says, sure, you published it in 1943. Sure, you lost your last copy in 1947. Sure, we've spent billions of dollars making sure that there is a readable copy of it. But hey, we still love you. If anybody reads the file or anybody does a print on demand from that book, we'll pay you $1. Okay? We'd be so much better off if we could make that deal. Penny would be better than $1 on that, by the way. But we'd be so much better off if we could make that arrangement. We could save so much on the way in which we store and access our materials. There could absolutely be, as we say in the business school, a win-win situation. That seems to be a hard argument to make right now. It's, I think, virtually impossible to make until the lawsuit between the publishers and Google either settles or is resolved. It's hard to have conversations with publishers just now if you're on the other side of that lawsuit. I'm actually going to not skip through this example. I am going to say that the copyright setup makes it very hard to do certain kinds of research, especially research when you want to use current cultural artifacts as part of the work that you're doing. Even if you catch a fragment of a song in the background in a documentary about playgrounds in the Bronx, someone may try to force you to clear rights. And there's a story that's worth telling. A colleague of mine, he's an English professor, was writing a book, a monograph about the use of the still life as a style, as a genre across time. And of course he looked at the classical still lifes of the great 19th century artists. And then he wanted to juxtapose them against Clinique ads. Right? Now a Clinique ad is actually a form of still life. This is the kind of thing that English professors can see, and people like me, when they see it, say, that's why I'm not an English professor, that's pretty cool. And so he could not get any university press that he went to a number of them, to be willing to publish those images without clearing the rights. Now, that use of those images is so plainly a fair use, right? There's no alternative market for old Clinique ads. And if there is, it must benefit Clinique, right? I mean, you'd think. The interest in this is entirely, basically, you look at the four factors, it's a slam dunk. You couldn't get it done. Why? Because any publisher was afraid of being sued. If you get sued and lose on copyright infringement, you get creamed on various kinds of damages. And what Congress is trying to do as of yesterday, with the bill the House just passed, makes those damages bigger, right? So how does making damages bigger help the purposes of copyright? It doesn't, right? What it does is it makes people even more afraid of asserting fair use. That's bad news for us and for our industry, Why can't our industry lobby about this? And it may not even increase the incomes of the people who want it to happen, because to the extent that their model is every time anybody looks at something of ours, you've got to pay us, it's not at all obvious that that's going to increase. It's going to reduce total looks, and whether it increases or reduces total pay is, I think, unclear. And yet it seems to be very hard to shake this one. Okay, so quickly, what do we have to do? We have to revise the rights environment so that we can really make good use of the technology. And by that I don't mean, information wants to be free, I mean, let's revise the rights information so we really can take advantage of the technology. And I don't even mind if publishers make somewhat more money. We need to revise our own missions to exploit the technology. That means that we should share both print and electronic collections much more than we do. Now, UC is the leader in this because you have one system, approximately, and you're pretty good at sharing things across it because you're under unified governance, pretty much. And it's hard enough to do even here. But what we obviously want to get to is the following situation. We want to be able to say to our faculties, if we're going to actually move books off-site in large quantities, don't you worry, the books are still going to be there, they're going to be well preserved, they're going to be findable as books, it might take a couple of days, even those ones that were badly printed and not very well bound. As we note, something, you never know what's going to be an artifact, but we basically create a museum, a vault, a warehouse of the books that don't have much or any discernible artifact value, but we don't throw them away. I think that's extremely important. I think it would be wrong and risky to throw them away. In fact, as a general point that I won't get to very much, I think we under-collect ephemera, and I'm very worried about our under-collection of ephemera, and in a way, those old monographs, the sort of physical version of them is a form of ephemera. Someone ought to hold on to them. But we can do that collectively and much more cheaply, and oh, by the way, effectively than what we do now. I'm sure you're finding this as we have with the Google project. We're loading up thousands of books a week, and Google takes them away, and then they come back. A lot of our books aren't in very good shape. They're not good for more than one more read or two yet, and it would be really nice if we could figure out how to put them in environments where they are not subject to vagaries of heat, cool, earthquake, rain, bad sprinkler systems, and undergraduate cups of coffee. They'll actually do better. So we do that for the print collection. For the digital collections, once they're available somewhere, they're easy to move around. Let's figure out how to take advantage of that. Again, CDL could be an exemplar of that. And then we do local services of various kinds on top of that serve our individual campuses. And I think that actually in the world of the information age, we, being the ones who care about information and its authenticity, still give us a great deal of work to do, but a lot of that work is at higher scale in the individual university. So we should be digitizing whenever possible on this, and concerned about this information to artifact continuum. It seems to me likely that print on demand is going to become more and more and more important. It's really cheap to do pretty well. I'm amazed at how cheap it is to do well. My university press director tells me it's very expensive to make books, and then Lightning Source does it at 2 cents a page. That's interesting, isn't it? And the Espresso book machine seems to be, do a good job. The whole new business model of the Rice University Press is a very low per page costs. And I'm now persuaded by the Kindle. Has anybody used the Kindle yet? Some of you must have. I haven't. Nobody has, I don't believe you. Oh, this is scary, Tom. These people aren't working hard enough. Okay. So I haven't seen one. I've read 7,912 blog entries about them. And what they say to me is, gee, it's actually going to be quite a while before we have an ebook reader that we think is as good as a book. It does a lot of things well. It's slightly better than the Sony in some ways, not as good in others. I've been using a Sony for trips to Asia for years now. It's nice. It's not nearly as nice as a book. So whereas I used to think there'd be a good ebook handheld solution that would work for most readers pretty soon now. I think that's actually pretty far now, even though it will have a number of very good specialized solutions. That makes, again, print on demand much more plausible. Notice that compared to the costs of holding on to books and keeping them in good shape and keeping them accessible, if we can figure out how to share those costs, having a digital file of a 350-page book where you can fully recover the cost of doing a decent print-on-demand copy for $7 if somebody wants it is probably a bargain, even if you give away every one of the print-on-demand versions. It's really a bargain if you can recover some of the costs. And I think that's a direction that we're very likely to head. It's a good direction to go. We have a huge job to do with provenance and reliability in digital media. It's easy to counterfeit these puppies, we all know it. It's easy to change versions and editions without telling anybody. The sort of notion of what is the reference copy, what is the authentic copy of something, which is actually fairly difficult in print, as we all know, is very, very difficult. And I think that's going to require very high-level solutions in the nonprofit sector. Here's where chancellors, provosts can't do this. This is where chancellors and presidents actually all have to get together and create an institution, some set of institution that we trust. And then, I'm taking too much time, so we want to display the good special collections stuff, make it easier to find and easier to use, and crucially, we want to teach undergraduates the importance of real scholarly uses and methods so that they have some idea in this world where they're flooded with notions of what might be true. We have to teach them both skepticism and some, the practical methods of getting past your skepticism. So you look at something and you say, can that be right? Well, it might be. Gee, if that were right, this should be right too. Let me go look this up, right? That's what we do. That's what we do for a living in scholarship, is ask questions in that form. If we can teach undergraduates how to do that using authenticatable, authentic library materials, we will have a wonderfully well-functioning democracy forever, and it will well support universities, and that'll all be good. So, here we are. The provost, oh gee, that isn't grammatical, walks into the library, wants it to serve the institution as inexpensively as possible, which means it supports scholarship first and foremost. That's the business we're in. We teach school well, and we use the library to do it. We save money when we can, because actually there's lots of good things that the university can do with money, one of which would be to not raise tuition as much. To make the place look good, because actually the library is a strategic resource for the university itself and ought to be, and we should think carefully about what that looks like. To keep the faculty happy, one quick note on this, sometimes we keep the wrong faculty happy. Right? The faculty who come to the library a lot and who fell over the arcane parts of our collections are not always the wave of the future. There's faculty who don't come into the library, who use library materials without knowing it, who would love it if their students had a really better appreciation of the methods of scholarship and wouldn't mind if we helped them to teach the students. They're not going to let us do it, and they probably shouldn't, but we can be engaged in it. If we can get to them, that would be really important. Those are also, by the way, the ones the provost cares about. And the summary of all of this is it's all about demand. How do we generate demand for the things that we do well? How do we articulate the value of the things we do well? And the biggest problem, I think, is we don't have institutions that are effective, that are organized at the right scale for the technology, which is often nationwide or worldwide. The two exceptions are Microsoft, which has completely reorganized the front office functions of every institution in the world. Right? We all use the same suite of software or open source copies of it almost all the time. Yes, I know there's somebody in the English department who thinks WordPerfect 5.1 is still the best thing that ever happened, but there actually aren't that very many, and I like it too. And Google, who has also changed, again, sort of created a uniform look and feel format to enormously important things we do. Those are both commercial institutions. You cannot trust commercial institutions to get provenance and authenticity and reliability and the determination of what is the reference copy right. You cannot. It has to be nonprofits that does that. And if you ask me, I'll tell you why that has to be true. So the institutions we do have, of course, don't want to become these other grander institutions. They want to keep going on the way they have in the past. There's a quote from Joseph Schumpeter that is worth making here. This is actually Brad DeLong paraphrasing Schumpeter. But it's simply this. The innovator shows that a product, a process, or a mode of organization can be efficient and profitable, and that elevates the entire economy. Think of this as the economy of public scholarship. But it also destroys those organizations and people who suddenly find their technologies and routines outmoded and unprofitable. University presses, dare I say that? Some of them anyhow. Capitalism cannot progress without creating short-term losers and alongside them shorter and longer-term winners, and figuring out how to get those who are going to lose from optimizing with respect to this technical change to acquiesce, to get out of the way, to be treated well on the way out. I think that's an enormously difficult institutional problem, especially for universities, which are really not very good at change that hurts anybody identifiably member of the community. And I also finally note that the university itself isn't exempt, right, from just this same set of forces, from being asked to use the technology more powerfully. And the Spellings Commission is the tip of that iceberg. We're going to, even though we're very successful institutions in many ways, we're going to be called upon to do it better, faster, cheaper, and the right answer might be no. The it that we do has to be done slowly and expensively. I think that is part of the right answer. But we should find those cases where we can adapt to technical change. It'll make us much more credible, and it'll also allow us to do more. So things could be utterly terrific. The technology definitely allows it, or things could look a lot like that. The institutions of our society definitely allow that. Thank you. And I'll talk about anything. And I'm here to learn from you. Yeah?
My name is Gail Ford. I work for the AUL for collections. I'm curious what you see as our future for grouping research libraries to serve the public good across state lines.
Well, I think we should probably figure out how to do that. So we have a consortium of sorts in the Midwest called the CIC, which is across state lines, the Committee on Institutional Cooperation. And the thing about California is it's a medium-sized, nation-sized state, and so intrastate means something here that it doesn't mean in many other places. The best collaborations that I have right now are with institutions in California, Virginia, and then the rest of the Midwest. So I think the opportunity is there. The state boundary is perfectly irrelevant to the fiber that runs underneath it someplace. Now, institutionally, the fact that there is a state government, that there is a state board of regents, may make it much easier to do intrastate cooperation than interstate. But I would hope that we can extend those institutions. If CDL is really successful, and it's been successful at many things already, and the shared print collection idea is successful in California, you can be assured that lots of us who live elsewhere are, A, going to want to participate, if we can figure out how. We probably have to pay something, I get that. And B, use it as a model for other arrangements where the fact of state lines may make those arrangements institutionally more difficult, but here's the value, so why not do it? That'd be my hope.
One of the largest expenses that the library has is actually for digital material, which should be a lot cheaper, namely journals. And I think, if I understand the history correctly, libraries are to a certain extent blamed for that. But how does that cost how can that cost be reduced?
Well, I have ideas that range from fanciful to radically bizarre on that subject. You can figure out which end of that continuum, if it is one, the first idea is. I was talking at lunch, actually, and said, we ought to find out what Elsevier would charge us to buy it. Now, there's two possibilities. Either we can afford it, seems unlikely, or we can't, seems likely. If we can't, and if it's a big number, then we should tell our regents and our legislators and our congresspeople, gee, look at all the money that this institution, this organization is making off of us, and what effect that has on the growth of tuition that you decry, what effect that has on large class sizes and the inability for us to get kids through in 4 years because they can't get the courses they want, what it does to prevent many of our institutions from having access to vitally important material, including material in the health sciences, much of which has been paid for by NIH. Make that case. Now, libraries aren't going to be very good at making that case. It's too self-serving, and we don't know how to squawk very loud. But we do have, what's the president's office for? Chancellors and lobbyists in various settings, I think, could use this kind of information to make that kind of argument. So that's one route. The second route is, harder to do in many ways, more likely to be successful though, is to just reclaim the industry. So here's the amazing fact about this industry in my view. Starting about 1970, which is when Elsevier and Academic Press, back in those days, and others really started the explosion of new journals, and it was pre-electronic, right? We in the academy, who had perfectly functional university presses, over 100 of them, gave to the private sector the profitable parts of our business, right, and kept the unprofitable parts. Hot damn! What a really fine business strategy that has proved to be. The only saving grace has actually been the academic societies, the learned societies, many of which still produce at cost plus enough to run the annual meeting, which is a whole lot less than what some of the commercial publishers are charging. Can we take back that industry and produce perfectly high quality text, images, refereeing processes? Actually, we do the refereeing processes already, but we do it under the auspices of these editorial boards that are attached to commercial journals. Sure we can. Can we organize ourselves to do that? That's very difficult. And again, I'm quite interested in trying to figure out models for university publishing entities, they may or may not be university presses, to take over enough journals to at least discipline the marketplace. And I think that that's actually doable, especially in light of the fact that almost all of the resources, which are the talent and time of faculty members, we're already paying for in one way or another. If we don't do that, then we're continuing to have this huge tax on our own enterprise, largely in the STM areas, because that's where most of the money is. I think that's bad for scholarship and not a good use of our resources. So I think there are some things that we can do. We're doing little bits of them. At Michigan, we've created one absolutely top flight refereed journal in philosophy that's online only. It's called Philosophers in Print, and you can actually count articles in it towards your tenure case if you're in philosophy. One. Right? We need, how many of such journals do we need to really make a difference in the marketplace? A couple thousand? We better get on it.
My name is Karen Monroe, and I work in the teaching library. I'm wondering if you could say a little bit more specifically about how Michigan is leveraging the output from the Google digitization project.
Well, we have an entity called MBooks. And so you go into our card catalog, it's not a card catalog, you go into our electronic catalog, Merlin, and you'll sometimes see a little lightning, and you click on the lightning bolt, and you'd think you'd then get to the actual resource, but of course, the way we've organized it, you don't. You then get to a page saying that there is an electronic resource, and then you have to click on that in order to get to it. If it's public domain, then you have page images, or OCR text renditions of the work in its entirety, in whatever quality we got it in plus improvements that we might or might not have made. If it's not in the public domain, you have full search capacity, but no reading capacity at all. So even less than Google Book Search gives you. Google Book Search gives you a snippet. We give you a page number, and we give you all the page numbers where your searched for text appears. But basically, like Google Book Search, it's just basically an enhancement to the catalog. We have not used that material in electronic reserves. So if we do something in electronic reserves, we would actually scan an appropriate part of the book separately and go through the permissions rigmarole and so forth. We're pretty careful about that. I think we're a little more cautious. Let me put that differently. Yes. I think we're a little more cautious than we should be. Then you asked, so who made the decision? Well, actually, I didn't. The general counsel did. I think we're a little more cautious than we should be about the use of that. And I also, again, think until the publisher, author, Google lawsuit is resolved one way or another, we're likely to stay pretty cautious. I'm dying to be able to use that material. Now, where we can use it is in data mining, text mining, for real scholarly purposes. Some of that's going on. I'd love to figure out how to use it for mashups of various kinds with other things for undergraduates. So far, we're still only in the world of public domain there.
Yes.
I'm Pat Moen, I'm also from the teaching library. I totally agree with you that libraries and actually universities need to reorganize on a greater scale and scope. And I'm interested in your thoughts about what are the incentives or what will cause institutions to become motivated to do so.
Yeah, so I think that what's going to happen, there's a sort of good version of this and a not so good version. The good version of this is people will see really cool things that you can do at a much broader scale, and then want to make the institutional arrangements to make them happen. And again, what happens here, especially with the California Digital Library, will be very important as a kind of proof of concept in that area. The other version is from the other side. At some point, the provost is going to walk into a bar where there are 5 other provosts, and they're going to say, "How much money are you spending on your library?" "Huh, that's really a lot of money. And what are we doing? We're buying the same things from the same publishers, right, and distributing them in the same way, and we are spending a ton of money preserving the same books on campus so that similar historians can get at them right away when they want them. How about we don't do that anymore? How about we figure out how to take advantage of the technologies in ways that liberate resources for higher purposes in the university?" That second outcome, I think, is plausible over time as there's more and more pressure on cost. It would be really nice if it happens, the librarians were hand in glove with the provosts talking about the higher quality of scholarship that the library can help to deliver in a different configuration, as well as the saving of resources. If it comes up as okay, we're going to save this money version, it's going to be an order, right? Cut the budget in this way, arrange things in that way. If it comes up as, gee, here are all these really interesting things we could do, and in a cost-effective way, if we organize ourselves differently, we're much more likely to get involved in how the work gets done.
Let me ask you a last question.
Sure.
You're now leading an organization that's hiring people into the Michigan Library. Are you imagining that you're going to be hiring new kinds of people, different than, say, even a few years ago?
So I'm really impressed at how good the people in the library are, especially the young people. Most of what I've said, they might disagree with little bits of, and of course they won't tell me, but that's actually, they will tell me. That's one of the things I like about them. There's sort of sense of what can and ought to be done in the library, their enthusiasm for new technologies, for social networking technologies, for thinking of mashups as scholarly work, right, which I think is actually right, they're right there already. Many of them tell me, you know, I really wish I were a stronger programmer. Right? There's so many things I want to do for people that I'm doing things for that just require some programming skill, and having to go to the place where the programmers live in the basement amongst the rats and things it'd be better if I could do some coding. I'm sorry, I hurt somebody's feelings. It'd be better if we had more control over that. So that does lead me to ask, what is the suite of technical skills that are appropriate in the context of library training? That said, the sort of fundamentals of concern with provenance, authority, cataloging, access, this amazing ability to find things in subjects that you don't know very much about, the enthusiasm for learning subjects to learn something about, all those things that librarians have had for a long time, that's I think still our niche in the marketplace. And you do want flexibility with respect to technical change, but most of the young people that I see in our library seem to have that.
On that, I'm happy to go. We'll get for a party, and we're hoping Paul can join us there later. He's another appointment